sharp rib ends, then you're going to prevent the rib from poking through the plastic and, at least theoretically, imparting a pre-smoked flavor to your ribs. Okay, so the bellies are now cut in half and ready to be cured. Tenderloin, spare ribs, a little bit of sausage meat, which was the part of the abdomen that ran back up on the back leg. He removed first before primaling, and then he has the loin. He's going to separate again where the lumbar section, which is where the ribs meet the transverse processes, these little bones there. Cut all the way down through there. This is going to be a little bit different than the first half just because of the feather bones.
You talked about the noise that you hear? Different bones?
Oh,
meat?
I haven't. I'm sure that's obvious to everybody, but he knows when he's done sawing just by listening. It doesn't always change how it feels, but when you hear the actual sawing of the bones stop, put the saw down. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with a bunch of shredded meat. So he's going to get up underneath the transverse. Again, there are these little rib ends. They're not true ribs, but they do hold the skeleton in place. He's going to stay as tight to them as he possibly can. This is a pretty finicky part of butchering, just by virtue of the fact that it is really tight to the loin on both sides. So he's going to have a spine, and then the feather bones and the transverse all hug the loin really, really tightly. And if you're not careful, you can, while removing, take off a really good section of your loin with you. Or at least it takes away.
Not my loin.
Has anybody in here ever made pork stock? No. Yes. Yeah, it's not super common. We had a workshop not long ago at our place, and I think we were making risotto or some rice dish that we were going to cook in stock instead of water. And somebody asked if we were using beef or chicken stock to cook it in, because it really isn't a known thing. It's not a common thing. And a lot of people know about chicken stock or bone broth, but they only associate it with either chickens or beef. But pork stock can be made really, really delicious. And as I said, you have all of this meat from the head and all the leftover meat from the bones already going into your stock pot to pull off. You may as well make it into yummy stock by adding all the aromatics as well. Okay, so we're cruising right along. He's got the back section of that loin, same thing. This is often referred to as a porchetta, where you're eating the skin and the fat on the loin. But in its truest form, the belly would still be attached to that loin, and you could remove all of the ribs and the spine, and then roll the loin into the belly itself and truss it. And then you're basically cooking a loin wrapped in belly on your grill or in your smoker. It's terrible. It's a pretty rich meal. You gotta kind of have to be starving to eat it. Okay. And then we've got the rib chops.
You want to talk about cleaving? We don't have our cleaver today.
Yeah, we couldn't bring our cleaver. It's too heavy. We barely made, our suitcase was already over 50 pounds. So we had to leave the cleaver behind. But the cleaver exists in this particular context for this. And we have every reason to believe that's why it's referred to as a pork chop. Because as you cut down through, if this were turned upside down, you would cut through the skin, the fat, and the meat, and then you would chop with your cleaver through the spine. And that's how you end up with your rib chop. Because we don't have the cleaver with us, Saul's going to do the exact same thing. It's actually a little neater. When we do use our cleaver, and I would highly recommend this to anybody that goes down this road. Even if you think that you're going to be able to strike that cleaver exactly where you're aiming, you're probably not going to do it the way you think. So we actually have just a large wooden mallet that we fashioned that we hold still where we want to strike, and then we hit the cleaver with the mallet, And that way the cleaver is going exactly where we want, and everybody goes home with all their digits.
I'm not sure I can roll these very well. I might just stop.
Okay, super.
So
Those are beautiful.
Yeah.
Those are beautiful.
So
If you
that's
see
the bit.
this, if you see this bone right here, that's the spine. It's also referred to as the chine in like butchering circles. The chine would then also be chopped with your cleaver. Now, I would recommend if you do that, you go ahead and get this process underway, and you look forward to using your cleaver, and you should have like a sacrifice block of wood, because when you go to strike that thing, it is probably going to go into whatever table or surface you're using. And we've had a number of even like poly cutting boards that have just cracked in half. So now we just use a large block of wood from a hunk of tree, and it just receives the blow. It's basically just a sacrifice piece of wood. But it's all kinds of chopped up, and we don't care. We'd rather not bury our cleaver in our cutting surface if we can avoid it. So he just sawed through that little bit of the spine, and now he's going to get up underneath those baby backs. And so we're going to have 2 nice racks of baby back ribs, 2 nice racks of spare ribs, and then by the time we get to the shoulder, we'll have those 2 nice racks of the picnic or country ribs. But then you get to decide whether or not you want to keep those in rack form or cut into individual, like we did the first time. Yes?
Yes. I was gonna say this could be a good time for a couple of questions.
Yeah, is everybody doing okay? Is this like a refresher that's valuable?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
As it relates to butchery, what kind of questions can I answer presently? Yeah.
So when you're cutting the pork chops, how many pork chops can you get out of
Yeah.
there if you don't want the ribs?
That's a great question. If you don't want the ribs, then it depends on how thick you want the chops. So if you have a 22-inch long loin and you take all the bones out, then you've got 22 inches of loin. It just depends if you want 3/4 inch or 1 inch or 1.5. And it could be some of each, right? Because if all the bones are removed, then you can have like mom and dad chops and kid chops. You know, like it's okay. Kids, they fight. They're not gonna start. But when we got going, we had a knife. I don't know that we have it here with us, but it was almost exactly 1 inch deep, like from the spine to the edge. And so we would just lay it down, and then stand it up, score, and make that cut. And then the next one, same practice, and we were able to pretty consistently get the 1 inch chops that we were after. Now after a while, we learned, well, we can actually cut them any thickness. And so we have some amount of variability. For me, I would say those are pretty close to perfect. Those are at least 1 1/4 inches thick. Any thicker than that, it is hard to cook on the grill or in a skillet and not overcook the outside if you're gonna still go for that pink center.
And this could be another loin roast too.
That could be one huge loin roast for like a big party. How many people here are familiar with Sous-Vide? Okay, more than I was expecting. That's awesome. Okay, so for those that aren't, Sous-Vide is a fancy French term that just means on vacuum, and it's basically anything. Doesn't have to be meat. It also be vegetables or fruit or anything else that you're going to cook. But the principle of it is you're putting this meat, let's say this pork chop, into a vacuum bag, no air, and you put it in a pot of water that could be on your counter. And you put this immersion circulator wand in that pot of water on your counter, plug it in, and you tell it what temperature to find. And if it's a steak and you like medium rare steaks, you set your sous vide to like 121 degrees. It heats that water to 121 degrees and then holds it there. So your steaks will be medium rare all the way through, from the edge to the center and back to the edge, and you can hold it there as long as you want or until you're ready to eat it. And you take it out of that bag and it's going to be soft and mushy and not awesome, unless you then hit it on a really hot searing skillet or a scorching hot grill, and then you get the finished sear of a perfectly cooked steak. It's definitely cheating, but if you've ever eaten at a fancy restaurant in the last 5 years and you got a piece of meat, you will notice that it will not go from black to gray to pink to red and then back again. It'll be pink all the way through. And it's because in those restaurants, they can make sure that every single meat that you eat is cooked exactly as you want it, because they've got all these different vessels of medium, medium rare, medium well, etc. And they take it out, they sear it, and you're getting a perfect steak or chop every time. So that's kind of an aside, but it is at least worth looking into. They're a fun detour down the culinary road. Any other questions? Sir.
I know that it's a really specialized cut of meat, but have you done a pork crown roast at all?
Yeah, with beef we do crown roasts. With pork, I don't know that I've ever done it. If I did, it was in the early years. When I started raising pigs, and this applies to almost everybody, as soon as you